There's a kind of tired that sleep helps. And then there's another kind. The kind where your body may not even be doing that much in the moment, but something inside still feels worn down. Like you've been carrying conversations that never happened. Decisions that haven't arrived yet. People's needs. Your own expectations. Old versions of yourself. The pressure to stay okay. And what makes this kind of tired difficult is that it doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. You can still function. You can still go to work. You can still answer people. You can still laugh at the right moments. You can still make dinner, fold laundry, pay bills, take care of what needs taken care of. But underneath all of it, there's this quiet sense that something in you hasn't actually exhaled in a long time. Not fully. Not in a way that reaches the deeper place. And I think a lot of people are living there, not completely falling apart, not completely fine either. Just tired in that strange middle place where life keeps asking for presence, and you keep showing up, but part of you feels like it's running on something thinner than it used to. And sometimes that's the hardest kind of exhaustion to explain, because when nothing is obviously wrong, it feels harder to admit that something still feels heavy. People understand crisis. They understand burnout when it looks dramatic. They understand exhaustion when there's a visible reason. But what about the quiet accumulation? What about the months or years of being mentally on? What about the emotional weight of always anticipating, always adjusting, always trying to be better, calmer, more present, more patient, more healed, more responsible? That kind of tired doesn't always announce itself. It builds quietly, in the body, in the nervous system, in the way you sigh before doing something simple, in the way silence feels good but also uncomfortable, in the way you want to be around people but also don't want to explain yourself to anyone, in the way even good things can feel like one more thing to manage. Once you realize this, you start seeing that tiredness is not always about how much you physically did. Sometimes it's about how much of yourself you had to manage while doing it, how much you held back, how much you carried internally, how many times you stayed composed, how many times you didn't say what you felt, how many times you talked yourself through the day without anyone knowing. And honestly, that kind of tired deserves more compassion than people usually give it. Because we live in a world that often treats exhaustion like a personal failure. Like if you were more disciplined, you wouldn't feel this way. If you managed your time better, you wouldn't feel this way. If you had a better routine, better mindset, better habits, better boundaries, better sleep, better everything, then maybe you wouldn't be so tired. And yes, sometimes practical things matter. Sleep matters. Food matters. Movement matters. Boundaries matter. But there is also a kind of tired that comes from being human in a life that has asked a lot from you for a long time. And that can't always be solved by optimizing the schedule. Sometimes what's needed is not another improvement plan. Sometimes what's needed is honesty. A moment where you stop pretending that you should be able to carry everything lightly. A moment where you admit that maybe you're not lazy. Maybe you're not ungrateful. Maybe you're not weak. Maybe you're just tired from living with your shoulders slightly raised for too many years. And I think the body remembers that. Even when the mind moves on. Even when life looks calmer now. Even when things are technically better than they were before. The body can still be holding the shape of old pressure. Old urgency. Old survival. Old responsibility. And that's why rest can feel confusing sometimes. Because you finally stop moving, but you don't feel restored. You sit down, but the mind keeps running. You take a day off, but the body doesn't trust it yet. You try to relax, but some part of you still feels like it's waiting for the next thing to go wrong. That doesn't mean rest is failing. It may mean your system has forgotten what safety feels like without needing proof first. And that takes time. Takes more than one quiet evening. More than one deep breath. More than one weekend where nothing major happens. Sometimes the nervous system needs repeated evidence that it is allowed to set something down. Not forever, not irresponsibly, just for right now. And that can feel surprisingly emotional, because when the body finally starts loosening, grief can show up. Not always dramatic grief. Sometimes just a quiet sadness. A realization of how long you've been holding yourself together. How long you've been bracing. how long you've been trying to be okay before you actually were. And maybe that's why some people avoid slowing down. Not because they love being busy, but because stillness lets them feel what movement helped them avoid. Busyness can become a kind of shelter. Productivity can become a disguise. Even self-improvement can become a way to keep moving so you never have to feel the full weight of what you've been carrying. And I'm not saying that as criticism. It makes sense. People find ways to survive. People find ways to keep functioning. Sometimes staying busy is what helped someone get through seasons they didn't have the space to process. But eventually, the body asks for something more honest than survival. It asks to be felt. It asks to be listened to. It asks not to be pushed past every signal just because life still has responsibilities. And this is where things get complicated, because life does still have responsibilities. The dishes don't disappear because you're emotionally tired. Bills don't pause because your nervous system is overloaded. People still need you. Work still expects you. Your family still has needs. The world does not always give people clean, spacious conditions to recover in. And that is part of what makes this kind of tired so human. You are trying to heal inside a life that keeps moving. You are trying to soften while still needing to be strong. You are trying to rest while still being responsible. You are trying to feel your own life while still showing up for everyone else's. That's not easy, and pretending it is only makes people feel more alone. So maybe the question is not, how do I fix this tiredness immediately? Maybe the question is gentler than that. Maybe it is, where can I stop adding extra weight? Because sometimes we cannot remove every demand from life, but we can begin noticing where the mind keeps multiplying the pressure. The task is already there, but then the mind adds shame. The conversation is already difficult, but then the mind adds rehearsal. The day is already full, but then the mind adds the belief that you should be handling it better. And suddenly you're not only living the day, you're carrying judgment about how you're living it. That's the part that wears people down quietly. Not just the work, the internal commentary around the work. Not just the emotion, the resistance to the emotion. Not just the responsibility, the identity built around whether you're performing responsibility correctly. Once you realize this, tiredness starts revealing something important. It shows you where life is asking for care, not necessarily escape, not necessarily a complete life change. Sometimes just care. A slower morning when possible, a little less phone, a little more honesty, a real conversation instead of pretending, a boundary that doesn't need a dramatic explanation, a moment outside before going back in, a meal eaten without rushing, a night where you don't turn your own exhaustion into another failure. Small things, not because small things magically fix everything, but because they remind the body that life is not only something to endure. There are still places where softness can enter. There are still moments where you can be a person, not just a function. And I think that matters more than people realize. Because when you've been tired for a long time, you can start forgetting that you are allowed to receive anything. You become so used to giving effort that receiving quiet feels unfamiliar. You become so used to solving that being held by a simple moment feels almost strange. A song in the car, warm water on your hands, the house finally settling at night, someone laughing in another room, the first sip of coffee before the day becomes loud. These moments do not erase exhaustion, but sometimes they reach places that explanation cannot. They remind you that you are still here, still human, still able to be touched by life, even if only briefly. And sometimes briefly is enough to begin. I don't think the goal is to never feel tired again. That wouldn't be honest. There will be seasons that ask more from you. There will be days where you are stretched thin. There will be moments where you don't have much left and still have to keep going. But maybe something changes when you stop turning exhaustion into a verdict against yourself. When tiredness is allowed to be information instead of shame. When you can say, I am tired, without immediately needing to defend why. That alone can soften something. Because so much of people's suffering comes from not only feeling what they feel, but feeling like they shouldn't feel it. Tired, but also guilty for being tired. Overwhelmed, but also ashamed for being overwhelmed, needing quiet, but also afraid that needing quiet means they are failing the people around them. That double layer is heavy, and it is not always necessary. Sometimes tiredness is simply the truth of the moment, not the whole truth of your life, not proof that you are broken, not proof that you cannot keep going, just the truth of right now. And when right now is allowed to be honest, life becomes a little less divided. You don't have to perform being okay while secretly collapsing inside. You don't have to make exhaustion poetic. You don't have to turn it into a breakthrough. You don't have to immediately explain it. Sometimes you can just acknowledge it. I'm tired, and let that be enough for a moment, not as an ending, as contact, as a return to what is actually happening, because that's where real life is, not in the polished version of yourself, not in the person you think you should be by now, not in the future version who has everything figured out. Real life is here, in the body that has carried you through more than you sometimes admit, in the mind that has tried to protect you even when it overworked itself, in the heart that still cares even when it feels worn down, in the ordinary day that continues imperfectly without waiting for you to become completely restored. And maybe part of living unfinished is allowing yourself to be tired without disappearing inside the tiredness, to keep living but more gently, to keep showing up but with less violence toward yourself, to keep caring but not confusing care with constant internal strain. Because you are not only here to get through things, you are here to feel your life too, even the quiet parts, even the unfinished parts, even the days where you don't feel inspired, even the seasons where rest comes slowly, and maybe little by little that kind of tired begins to change, not because you force it out of yourself, but because you stop building a life where every part of you has to stay braced all the time. You allow small openings. You let life reach you again. You stop treating softness like something you have to earn. And one day, maybe not dramatically, maybe not all at once, you notice that your shoulders are lower. Your breathing is easier. The room feels less like something to manage. The day feels less like something to survive. Nothing huge happened. No grand transformation announced itself. But something in you stopped gripping quite so hard. And that matters, maybe more than we think. If this episode connected with you, feel free to like, subscribe, and share it with someone else who may be tired in a way they haven't known how to explain.